Hi everyone, and Sedona weather isn't cooperating for me to make an outdoor video this week. It's been one of the wettest winters I can remember here, and feels like I'm living in Seattle, not Sedona. But anyway, so I'm here in this cafe. There'll be sort of weird noises on the video, but I wanted to talk about last week and then this upcoming week. And it was really great to read all of your discussions and your thoughts, experiences, and what you believe related to science and spirituality and religion. And I just wanted to encourage you, and the sort of purpose of this course really is to live the question. So if I would say the words science and spirituality, then let's take that as a kind of Zen koan. In other words, we might use our intellects and rationality to try and solve it, or to say, oh, well, but really, the way forward with a koan is via the realm of insight. One sits with a koan, one looks at it from all angles without trying to decide ahead of time what the answer might be. And so science and spirituality, or science and religion, just take it as a kind of koan, not a problem, but a kind of koan. And it's like, so it's going to speak to us, science and spirituality, science and religion is going to speak to us over the period of the next 13 weeks from now, and we're interested in what it's got to say, and so all of the material of the course will sort of provoke and stimulate that the possibility of insight with respect to this koan, and that's how the course is really organized, because there really aren't right answers and wrong answers, or I'm not even sure if there are better answers or worse answers, or better perspectives and worse perspectives. It's ultimately we're going to come to a personal view about this, and there isn't a right and wrong about that. But I do feel like there are more informed perspectives, there are deeper perspectives, wider perspectives than others, and so the idea of the course is really to, Socrates says the unexamined life isn't worth living. Well, let's not leave this region of science and spirituality unexamined. So we'll examine it. But ultimately, there are answers, and there aren't. There isn't a right way. And so the object is for us all to expand our perspectives on these things. And ultimately, we may transcend and include science and religion with our viewpoints and a kind of thinking. So science is a kind of thinking, and religion is often a kind of thinking. And so we might assume that the answer doesn't lie in any of either of those two kinds of thinking. It lies in a kind of thinking that would be beyond both. And we have to let that arise, let that come to us. We will change ourselves into that form of thinking. And some of us have very sophisticated and deep viewpoints already. And I'm just suggesting that those could change. So let's just stay open, basically, to that change. Anyway, your discussions were all sort of really great, and I loved reading them, and it's very stimulating already. And we're still in the sphere of this idea about our worldview and the importance of worldview. What does that mean? What is worldview? And this upcoming week, you're going to be asked to try and define your worldview, which is not a straightforward thing to do. And I don't think we should get too detailed about it. But it's, for me overall, it's trying to surface what I really think is real in this world, about me, about this world. What is really real? What really matters? What's of fundamental importance? What's fundamentally true? And what I would like to encourage you to do, so you can use those questions as a guide, or you can go some other route with respect to worldview. But in the discussions, there was this interesting phrase or expression that came out in discussions from Nikki, which was that, that there might be a schism between our personal worldview and the collective worldview. And I was trying to express that, but I think that's much more concisely stated. So in looking at our worldview, can we become much more precisely, much more accurately aware of that schism? Is there a schism? And if there is a schism, then what is the nature of that schism between the personal and the collective? And so that's one thing to pay attention to this week. And then the next is the schism, and this one is much harder, but much more important. The schism between what we think our worldview is and what it really is. So the unconscious component. Perhaps that's not the right way to say it, but between the unconscious and the conscious. So I actually have a probably what would be considered a rather radical worldview in terms of my conscious beliefs, conscious thoughts about reality. But unconsciously, I'm still very much influenced by the collective worldview. So that my everyday experience is often much more of a collective kind of experience than it is my kind of experience. And so my kind of experience, of say the natural world or anything, where I'm really sort of seeing beyond the obvious, is something that I live to more or less of a degree, and sometimes I'm more in it and sometimes I'm less in it, and sort of falling back into a more collective kind of way of living, and then sort of moving out into a further orbit away from it and closer to what I think is my view. And I just think that for me, this is the power of that collective. The power of that collective is it's deep in our cells because we were exposed to it since we were very, very young. And so it lives in us, and then so it's our perception is largely controlled by unconscious beliefs, not by our conscious beliefs. So for me, at least, it's something that I have to work on. I have to work on undoing, seeing the collective belief in me, undoing it, doing practices that help undo that, help establish slowly myself on a different territory, and move camps kind of thing. So that's just my experience. But anyway, in this second week, let's try and pay attention to that. Let's surface some of that. The more we make things conscious, the less power they have over us. And so part of the idea is to surface the unconscious collective in us and become aware of it, and not to say that it's bad or good or anything. It's just like, oh yeah, there's that, I have that, I do that. So so that's the worldview component. And then this week, the movie Contact is to be watched. I hope you enjoy it. It's a movie, that's based on a book written by Carl Sagan. So Carl Sagan was a scientist, right? And he had that famous series Cosmos. And I would sort of about Carl Sagan. He was a scientist who I feel had a very spiritual attitude about his science. And that is actually quite rare, and you don't actually find it in his current replacement, the new Cosmos, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He has almost none of that at all. So it's a very much impoverished, although much richer in terms of the visuals. The new series Cosmos, it's impoverished in its spiritual side. The injecting this sort of spiritual side of wonder and awe that Carl Sagan naturally had. Well, that side of things comes out in this movie, which is based on his book, and it really represents, the movie really represents, or can be seen to represent, a clash of worldviews, the worldview of religion and spirituality and the worldview of science. And so you can see it with that in mind, but I just watch it with an open mind. So some of you may well have seen it, but it actually, the movie is about the journey of a scientist who comes into a relationship with a man who has a spiritual worldview, a religious but spiritual worldview, really, and her experience of transformation, and then where that leads her to, it leads her to a very interesting place that I think we might all be able to recognize ourselves in that place that she finds herself in, sat in front of this congressional panel at the end of the movie with something she knows to be true but can't prove. And so for me, this is the movie, I hope, helps us to sort of surface this, what might be a kind of schism, and might be some tension that we all in some small or larger ways sit with, but it certainly elucidates the problem that a spiritual person might have in our society and culture. And so anyway, I hope you enjoy that movie, and I think that might be all I have to say for this week. In terms of living the question, let's live the question this week, or live it through the readings, and you'll learn about scientism from Houston Smith this week, and I really think that scientism is still the mainstream authoritative view that is held within the realms of science about what reality is. So you'll read that. And that's my experience within science, and I only left science less than 10 years ago. So I'm not that out of date. And I do believe that things might be changing at the fringes, but in the mainstream, scientism is what is thought. And I do think that scientism lies at the heart of our culture. And it affects how we teach and how we treat human beings and whatnot. We believe in experiment with respect to children and animals and things like that. To find truth, we believe in that method because we see the world as primarily mechanical, material. And that's the authoritative view. How you investigate the mechanical, how you investigate the material is the authoritative way. That means taking things apart, looking at the pieces. How do they fit together? That's what you do with a machine, right? To understand a machine, I'm going to take it apart and see what all the parts do. The machine is really nothing more than its parts. So that's called reductionism, and we'll be going into this kind of thing in more detail later on. But so that is how we work in our society. That is our way currently, and it reflects a deep base belief about us, ourselves, and the world. We can't change the world unless we change that belief. And so and I'm not saying the belief is wrong or bad, but if we want to change, then that's what we have to do. So let's explore it. Let's really look at that straight on, basically. So anyway, I hope you have a fun week. I hope the weather improves here. I hope the next video will be outside in the sun. Anyway, that's far more than I wanted to say. So I'll see you all next week.